All right, so this morning I have to introduce Narcon Nick.
Oh my gosh.
Formerly known as Nick the Narc.
Snitches get stitches.
Yeah. Snitches.
His favorite band is Rat.
No.
He didn't like that one.
Alice in Chains.
That was a double insult.
All right.
Okay.
Oh, all right.
So Nick is the director, as people know, of our COD program at LDR. He's been here since October of 2017. Previously earned 2 bachelor's degrees in 2006 from Metro State, one in philosophy, which describes this room. That's an important fact, because philosophy majors always live like this in my personal experience. And the other in law enforcement, which I'm assuming they ought not live like this. And later went on to complete his MA in clinical psych in 2016. Prior to LDR, he worked at RCCS, working specifically with addict offenders transitioning out of the Department of Corrections and back into society. And at Park Avenue Treatment Center in Minneapolis, Nick began his professional career in law enforcement beginning in 2003, working for the cities of Roseville. Oh, my stepdaughter was young enough, you would have intersected her. All right, and then Rosemont. And worked as a police officer for the city of Burnsville from 2005 to 2013. Nick's areas of specialty include addictions, criminogenic tendencies, and trauma. So, are we ready to rock? Yeah. I didn't hear you. Are we ready to rock? All right, let's go.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nick. Hi.
Free bird. Do we get a break sometime?
I'm also the, I just want to say I'm also the 2019 Fantasy Football Life Development Resources Champion.
The only player?
No, 1 of 8. First and foremost, just some disclaimer stuff. Speaking in front of people is not my forte, as some of you can relate to. I have this little thing. If you ever look at a squirrel, and a squirrel's busy doing something on the tree, and then all of a sudden a nut falls from the other part of the tree, and the squirrel's like, oh, I gotta go chase that nut. That's kind of like me. So in this presentation, I may go on a little bit of tangents. So I'm going to be looking for some nonverbal communication as to like look towards, okay, Nick, you need to move on. So there's that piece.
Yeah, we got you.
All right, so our theme, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So on the screen here are a list, or our pictures of some of my brothers and sisters that have lost their lives due to drug addiction and alcohol use. You got Elvis Presley, Prince, Whitney Houston, George Michael, Tom Petty, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix. One thing about this is addiction, it doesn't care who you are. It doesn't discriminate against anybody. It doesn't care if you're white, black, Hispanic, Asian, young, old, male, female, it doesn't care. It can affect all of us. And in this case, unfortunately, it affected these performers who were producing some pretty awesome music. So today, we are going to be covering a ton of stuff. We probably have more material than we're going to be able to get to. Addiction is a huge topic, and to cover it in 4 hours is, we're going to cover as much as we can in 4 hours, let me just say that. But first and foremost, we're going to start by learning about the physiology and psychopharmacology, what's actually going on in the brain when these substances are ingested. Understanding common substances and their detection. So one of my, where's my water? One of my goals here today is for you all to be able to go back to your offices, go back to your clients with a little bit more knowledge in terms of understanding what it looks like when somebody's intoxicated on alcohol comes in. What does it look like when somebody's on a 3-day meth binge and they're in your office? And they're presenting like they look like they have ADHD or mania. And then what does it look like when somebody's under the influence of opiates in your office? And if that's the case, then more immediate attention is going to be needed, and we'll get into that in a little bit later. Then we're going to do more of like an interactive role play. Philip and I are going to take on a clinician type-esque vignette sort of thing, and then we're also going to have my team come up here, panel of LADCs, and we just want to have like an interactive question and answer. Like, hey, I got this case with my clients presenting kind of like this. I'm kind of a little suspicious that this might be going on. This is going to be the format where we can have those questions answered, hopefully. And if we can't answer the questions, we'll try to find them for you.
Just lie.
Just lie.
Or just lie, yeah. Third piece, and then this after the role plays, we're going to look at the addicted client. What is the recipe for this person to become an addict later on in life? What are the stages that person goes through? I didn't wake up one day and just decided I want to be an alcoholic. Go get me a 175 of vodka. I'll do that the rest of my life. So it was a process. And we're going to cover a little piece on the vaping stuff, just because those of you who are working with adolescents, the vaping epidemic is a big piece, especially in the media these days. And then moving towards how do we treat, looking at addiction as a family disease, looking at the integrative approaches where we've come from in the last 40 years has just been incredible. The integrative care with mental health and substance abuse. So we're making grounds there. And then also kind of going back to that intake. When you guys first get your clients in that DA, the alcohol and drug abuse section in the DA, just maybe additional questions you might want to ask, and then based upon the appearance and the affect that the person's giving you in session. And then we can have some kind of question and answers with that as well. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about cultural considerations. We're going to talk about this war on drugs, which hasn't really worked, and has ended up incarcerating a lot of people indiscriminately. And then also we're going to look at kind of like where does all this stuff come from? It doesn't come from our back, it may be, but a lot of this stuff isn't being cooked in our backyards in Lakeville. Okay, it's coming from the South. It's coming from Central South America. It's coming over from Asia, and it's also coming over from Europe. So. So just before I play this clip is from the movie I Am Bill W. Bill W. is the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, first published in 1939, and this movie kind of portrays his life, pre-addiction, during the addiction, and then afterwards, and how he met Dr. Bob, who essentially was kind of like his sidekick / sponsor, and how just their message resonated with everybody. And in 2020, over 1 billion people have become sober because of Alcoholics Anonymous. So this cut takes place when he had just gotten home from the psych ward after going on a week bender, and it's just him and his wife. Yeah.
Excuse something.
I've been afraid. Does it have anything to do with me? Your drinking?
No. It's not you. It's me.
Why? Why do you do it to yourself?
I've been standing here all afternoon asking myself the same question. Why? I look out the window and I watch all the normal people walking by. It's funny, I don't think I've ever felt really normal all my life. I mean, like other people. I feel different somehow. Like I don't quite measure up. Ever since I can remember, I've had this feeling deep down in my gut, scared. I see people laughing at ease with each other. I'm on the outside looking in, afraid maybe that I won't be accepted. And then overseas, I found that a few drinks makes me feel comfortable, like I always want to feel. Gives me courage to be with people, do things, to dream. The money, the success, the respect, it was all good for a while, but it never seems enough. I always want doubles of everything to make me feel alive, worthwhile inside. And then it all began to slip away. I feel cheated, angry, always so full of fear. So I drink more, and it makes it okay for a while. I convince myself that things will turn around tomorrow, soon, that I'll make it all up for you, but it only gets worse. I keep promising you, others, myself, that's it, no more. Going on the wagon, that's it. And I think I mean it, but their guilt and depression. I can't look in a mirror or at you, especially at you. I've stopped believing everything. People die. Myself. I know it sounds insane, Lois. But in spite of all this, what I want right now more than anything else is another drink.
And that right there is the most confusing piece of this disease. He just laid out 3 minutes of how his life is just terrible. And his wife is in front of him, and if you know his backstory, his wife was there with him through it all. And he's laying down the journey about the depression and just not and feeling isolated and all that stuff. And he looks very contrite, right? He looks pretty believable. But in the back of his mind, he wants to have a drink. He wants to have the same thing that caused him all that misery. And that is the people that we deal with in our program, for the most part. It's the insanity of the disease. Bill W. said later on, the insanity of this disease is not what we do when we're all messed up on drugs and alcohol. The insanity of this disease is knowing where we've gone, where we've come from, and still going back to that crap after all the withdrawal is done. It's got to be insanity. So, why do we do this? I've gotten that question when I first got interviewed here and talking with other people, talking with members on our team. Why do we do what we do? Why do we work with this population? This population is very, very difficult because it's almost like we're not at, it's not like we're at odds with the mental health or we're at odds with the individual. We're at odds with their addiction. Their addiction that says to them to get up in the morning, gives them enough to just get through the day. But the reality is it's causing havoc in their life. These people lose everything because of this stuff. For me, my name's Nick and I'm an alcoholic. I say that word alcoholic not just because that's how I identify myself. I don't say my name is Nick, I'm an alcoholic in PTSD. No. I'm an alcoholic, and when I'm among my brothers and sisters in recovery, when I identify myself as that, I know that I'm starting that conversation with being honest. The first thing out of my mouth is being honest, because I am alcoholic. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. But the term alcoholic to me means more of a living type of thing. I understand that I have a lot of defects of character. I understand it. At one point I was very, very spiritually broken. And I'm here today standing in front of you because of God. I don't have anything else to give it to you because of God. That's the program I ran. I chose the drink instead of God for a while. And I had to unlearn that and put God back in the center. And once I did that, this psychic change happened. All these promises that they talked about in this Alcoholics Anonymous book came true for me. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. So, at first point, this is the book that Bill W. wrote in 1939. At a certain point in the drinking of every alcoholic, he passes into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. This tragic situation has already arrived in practically in every case long before it was first suspected. And in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, unlike Marcia, there's no copyrights. So at first, Bill W.'s drinking journey was during all of Prohibition, which is kind of crazy. Right after World War I, and Prohibition started in 1922, ended 1933. And this book was published in 1939. But they knew that if they were going to reach a lot of people, they had to have some type of a medical opinion to give this book some steam. And so the very first chapter in this book starts off with the doctor's opinion. So men and women who drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Duh. The sensation is so elusive that, while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after time, differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems to be the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented, unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Drinks which others drink with impunity. After they have succumbed to the desire again, the phenomenon of craving develops. They pass through the well-known stages of spree, emerging remorseful, with the firm resolution to not drink again. This is repeated over and over, and unless the person can experience a psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery. And that's the last time I'm going to read something that long. So, what is addiction? What do you guys think of addiction? All right, Nick, you're addicted to something. That's what addiction is. No. Yes. Everyone here understand it's a brain disease? Can I see a show of hands? Everyone understands that? Okay, well, it is. So you're all right. Addiction is defined as a chronic, relapsing brain disease that is characterized by compulsive drug seeking and use despite the harmful consequences. In a nutshell, people are using to get high, they're having consequences, and despite those consequences, they're still going back to it. So essentially, it's really not that complicated. The addicted person is not that complicated. The drugs in the brain changes its structure and how it works. These brain changes can be long-lasting and can lead to harmful behaviors seen in people who abuse drugs. It's drugs, drugs, drugs. What are these drugs? Substances other than chemicals that can be taken with food with the intent of altering the functioning of the body and mind. Sorry. Otherwise known as mood-altering substances. It alters your mood when we're happy and when we're sad, when we numb ourselves out, or when we're crazy hyper. It does something to our moods. And the piece of it in that drug that does that stuff is the psychoactive piece of the drugs. Drugs that change the feeling, perceptions, and behaviors. Not all drugs are psychoactive. The drugs that are psychoactive, we have them listed in our statute under schedules. That's how they're categorized. Non-psychoactive drugs, Tylenol, ibuprofen, blood pressure medications, stuff like that. You can take them, you may get sick off of them, but you ain't gonna get high off of them. Drug addiction. DSM-5, alcohol use disorder, severe, moderate, mild. In this case, we're just gonna break it down to just drug addiction. But these are the same criteria. Maladaptive pattern of use leading to clinically significant impairment. A need for increased amounts to achieve intoxication. Marked diminished effects with continued use of the same amount. So they're talking about tolerance. So as a person ingests a substance, their brain is making note of that. Their brain is making note of that because of a chemical called glutamate. And that glutamate gets sent to the amygdala, and now that person has a nice emotional tie to that drug. The substance is taken in larger amounts over a period of time. Inability to control use. I can't drink because when I drink, my next drink will take the next drink. And then the drink takes the other drink. I just don't drink like normal people. If you guys drink normally, I just can't do it. I just can't stop for some reason. It's just the way my brain works. Constant preoccupation with using, getting, or seeking drugs. Use continued despite persistent problems that are mental, physical, or social in nature. So for me, this constant preoccupation with using, the first thing in the morning that I'd think of when I'd get up would have something to do with alcohol. Now let's say I wake up, I don't have any work, it's Thanksgiving, I'm going to go to Mom's, everyone's going to cook for me, and I'm going to see my nephews and my nieces and play with my kids and all that stuff. Well, does that sound like you guys would agree that sounds a little exciting? Or not? And then afterwards, I'm going to watch the Cowboys get killed and yada, 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 and then boom, the night's done, okay? Well, with an alcoholic, the alcoholic's going to think, okay, yeah, that's all great and dandy, but when can I drink during that time? When am I going to be able to drink during that time? So now we're just going to kind of jump into kind of what's actually going on in the brain. Turn it up again.
No, you have to make the sound.
Oh, the sound, yeah.
Cravings. Whether we're ducking out for a smoke, going for glory at the blackjack table, or drowning our sorrows in a glass of wine, we all have ways that we seek to push our pleasure buttons. What happens when this need for pleasure becomes a full-time pursuit? When our fix turns into something more like a dependence. Used to be that addiction was considered a sort of moral failing. But now, with a much better understanding of how the human brain works, scientists are learning new clues about the vicious cycle of desire, binging, and withdrawal that traps tens of millions of people. Our brains evolved a reward system based on a chemical called dopamine. This amazing neurotransmitter creates cravings in us to encourage behaviors that help us survive, such as eating, procreating, or interacting socially. In turn, pleasure is then stimulated by other neurotransmitters in hedonic hotspots of the brain. When dopamine's craving circuitry overwhelms the pleasure hotspots, addiction occurs. Essentially, your reward system is hijacked. Let's break it down this way. Your desires are triggered when dopamine, starting at the top of the brainstem, travels through neural pathways to affect the brain. Drugs increase this flow of dopamine. Where does the dopamine go? It flows throughout the brain's craving circuit, including the dorsal striatum, where brain nerve cells called neurons begin to form habits by IDing fun things that you've done, like buying drugs or cigarettes. Dopamine also goes to the prefrontal cortex, where with the help of an amino acid called glutamate, rich visualizations that cue cravings are conjured. Think images of drug paraphernalia, sex, or a bottle of booze. Then there's the amygdala, where the dopamine causes neurons here to be stimulated by learned emotional responses, like rich, pleasure-coded memories. So what happens when drugs artificially flood these pathways with dopamine? For one thing, the rush can rewire your brain to want more drugs, and thus create addiction. But it turns out different drugs interact with the reward system in unique and interesting ways. Cocaine, for example, blocks dopamine transporters and prevents the removal of excess dopamine from synapses. Methamphetamine, on the other hand, floods the terminals of neurons, displacing dopamine into synapses instead. And heroin blocks dopamine inhibitors, causing synapses to flood with dopamine without restraint. The good news? With a refined understanding of the devastating effects of these drugs comes new angles and approaches to the treatment of addiction that have shown remarkable promise. Cocaine addicts have been able to shut off their cravings abruptly when electromagnetic pulses are applied to their prefrontal cortex. A drug hitherto used to treat muscle spasms, called baclofen, has shown promise for treating alcohol dependence. As more and more of our friends and family are affected by crippling addiction, it's comforting to know that we are finally finding effective ways to take our brains back.
So two chemicals I want to talk about. Dopamine and serotonin. Serotonin is a chemical that we understand as what? What's that? Happy hormone? Sad hormone too? And how about dopamine? All right. Yeah, so when there's dopamine, there's pleasure. We're feeling pleasure at least. So think about the human brain. Think about back to the reptilian brain, because I'm going to argue that addiction is more of a pediatric disease in that it begins, it may begin in utero. So you have dopamine and you have serotonin. And from that you can I'm trying to think how do I want to put this. From that you can have these type of behaviors: compulsion and perseveration. So if you think back to 150 years ago, compulsion is what?
Gotta do it.
I got to do it. Perseveration is what?
Can't stop thinking about it.
Can't stop thinking about it. Okay? So I got to do it and I can't stop thinking about it. Okay? So let's go back 150 years. I can't stop, sorry. What did you say, Luke?
Gotta do it.
I got to do it and I can't stop thinking about it. Well, back 150 years, you know, they're worrying about if their cow died or if their cattle died or anything like that. Or in this type of climate, they're worried about if they have enough dry wood. Okay? So if they see a 16-point big buck on a hunt, what do you think is going to happen to them? They're going to hunt. They're going to hunt. And part of it is that compulsion and that perseveration is going to motivate them to get that. And once they get that hunt, now they've been satisfied. It's the same type of thing with addiction. Instead of it being a 16-point buck, it's the drug of choice. So I'm going to go into more into this. And I argue this fact that all of our lives are kind of like an EKG. EKG is a... Jill, is she in here? What's an EKG?
It's a way of seeing what's going on in the heart.
Yep, electrocardiogram. So you have a... Do you think that would best represent kind of our ups and downs in life? Maybe, you know, and if things get really stressful, we're more like this. And if things are calm, we're just more like that. Well, that's kind of like...
PQRS is off. I'm sorry.
What's that?
Your PQRS is off.
Okay. I have no idea what that means.
Each
All right.
point has a letter that goes with it and has to be in a certain form for a normal heart rate.
Okay. This is the heart rate of somebody who just used meth. So anyways, we can agree that maybe at a baseline, we're right about here. Okay? So, despite all the shit that we've gone through in our life, we usually come back to this baseline. You know, whether it's something tragic that happens, a person dies in the family, you go through the stages of grief, and eventually you come back to this baseline. Okay? What happens is, and I should also say, this baseline kind of all the black here represents serotonin. Okay? So, what are some like high moments in your guys' life, like a memory you have from being at an event or whatever the case may be?
Bono looking up at me.
Okay. U2 concert.
Yeah. Jim's Corvette.
Jim's car.
Growing up in the Corvette.
Okay, we're going to put that as a bad one. Throw up.
New guitar.
A new guitar. How about family events have you guys gone on recently?
Birth of a child.
Who?
Birth of a child.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've done it a couple times.
I've done it 3 times and it was pretty wonderful.
New bicycle.
Okay. How about something that kind of sucked?
Car accident.
Loss of a child.
Death.
Mile 18 of a marathon.
Yeah, we're here.
Where does that fit?
That's mile 18. Okay. Okay, so we have this as a constant. You know that Jim's Corvette's awesome. So, Jim, if you're in here the first time you bought that sucker, you're probably just on cloud 9 for the next week or so. It's probably not in here. Were you on cloud 9, Rose?
I just care about sex and not drugs.
Okay. TMI.
It's like hearing your mom and dad talk about that.
Okay. So, let's, for all intents and purposes, we're just going to go to the birth of the child from
Fast forward.
All right, so, mothers, thank you for giving birth to your children. let me ask you, did you have a good meal afterwards? Or did you, anything like spark your showering or? Okay, sleeping? Did you ever eat any good food? Maybe this is a bad example of it. All right, we're gonna go away from.
Holding the baby and having that experience.
Holding a brand new baby is like the most awesome thing that has ever happened to you.
You're right.
A brand new baby who's just come out of your body, laying on your chest. It's pure. It's like.
Is it gonna spike dopamine?
It is going to spike dopamine through the roof to
Boom.
the highest, right to heaven, and you don't care if you ever eat again or not.
So our medical director just made a very good point. Holding that baby for the first time, all the emotions that are in there, it's going to cause a dopamine spike, okay? So it's going to cause a little dopamine spike, okay? With that little bit of dopamine spike, you will remember that for the rest of your life on how you felt. And you're going to remember the emotions, you're going to remember the environment. All that stuff is because that serotonin and that dopamine are working like it's supposed to.
Which allows you to get pregnant again.
And the biggest piece of that, the craziness, you go through all of that pain and it's, oh, I love this baby. Like it's, yeah. Oxytocin, I would argue that is the reason why, but that's another training. So anyways, so you take this, I made this too big, I'm gonna have to.
Your eraser's right there.
This doesn't work. Oh, here it is. Here's the one I wanted. So you have, the good parts where you're feeling pleasure, whatever it may be, eating a cookie or having a good sandwich or whatever the case may be. What happens in addiction is this spikes ridiculously high. Your dopamine spikes ridiculously high. And it takes a while for it to get back down to this baseline. Because normal dopamine responses in our brain, when we have food, there's going to be like 150% dopamine spike. When we have sex, it goes up to 200. Sex is one of the most natural pleasure-causing dopamine spikes we'll ever have, outside of external substances. Does that make sense? What was I going to say else with that? I'll put up the next chart. Maybe this will. Okay, so if you think at a baseline, we all start out with like 100 units of dopamine. Let's just say that, okay? And you can see with this, food, 150, video games, 175, you get 3 kills in a row in Call of Duty. Sex, 200%. Methamphetamine, 13,000. I drew these charts, by the way. So same type of premise, baseline of 100 up to 1,000. Baseline's normal, you have sex, it spikes, and then you return back down to your baseline of homeostasis. Not the case. I would argue that somebody going into addiction is probably waking up with around 70 to 80 units of dopamine. And I'll explain how that recipe kind of works later, but they take their first drug use and boom, it is ridiculously high. And then it takes a while for them to get down to a baseline, but the thing is though, they don't go down to this baseline. They go down even further. So now when you cross into dependency, each person is starting their day at about 35 to 40 units of dopamine. Think of that. How do you get out of bed? How do you think, imagine never being able to at least hope for something pleasurable to come in your day. So it's really, really hard. That's why a lot of these addicts, they will use just to get up to this baseline, just to get up to this baseline. They know this will never come back. This is called chasing the dragon. The first time somebody gets high off of heroin, the first time they get high off of meth, it's downhill for them. They will never achieve that same amount of high before. And so here's the struggle. And so how do we get them back up to this baseline? Through the use of, obviously, abstaining from the use of mood-altering chemicals, physical health, mental health, that sort of thing, to help them get back up there. One of the challenges that we have on our team is how do we get these guys to find things, or find pleasure in things that they used to. They don't do them anymore. Any questions with that? Go ahead.
Does their baseline ever reset where it's like it goes low, but then it
Yes, it will reset. And I'll get into that. It depends upon the certain types of drugs that they're using. Methamphetamine, cocaine, the stimulants, takes a lot longer. Somebody to get back to its homeostasis on methamphetamine is anywhere between 6 to 9 months. Is that, or is it 9 to 12? Is that
Yes.
Probably longer than that.
longer than that?
Well, and to keep in mind too, like a lot of these guys are like, I like to call it double dipping, right? So they're like high on meth and they're having a ton of sex. Well, so they're like double dipping dopamine, right? And so then they take the meth away and they're like, I'm gonna have all this sex, but they're not actually achieving any high. It's like terrible, or they're not able to perform, or and then that's discouraging, and so then their dopamine levels drop, and so it kind of becomes this like vicious cycle of how do we get them just to gain a little bit of pleasure, a little bit of pleasure, a little bit of pleasure. And they turn to food. You know, we have a couple guys right now where it's like food or caffeine or sugar.
Yeah.
So it's like all of it becomes more complex than just like one drug, right?
Yeah, and you brought up a good point. The hypersexuality with methamphetamine users, we'll get into that because that is a real scary thing that's going on, especially with the drug or with the female trafficking.
Can you go back one slide?
Yeah.
We don't have that.
Yeah. Can you send that out to us? Or
Yeah, that's awesome.
one up? That'd
Yeah.
be really interesting.
Oh shoot. You know what I didn't? No, I did. Okay, so in that video you saw how they represented cocaine, they represented heroin, and opiates. Alcohol is a little bit different. The interchange in the brain. Alcohol actually combines, or it releases opioid peptides that facilitate the dopamine release. So it almost binds to the opiate receptors, and that is what stimulates the release. And if you've ever taken a prescription hydrocodone or whatever, had your wisdom teeth out, you felt the effects of it. Not saying that you're high, but you felt the effects of it. It's pretty similar to alcohol. You know, you kind of have a little bit more chill back and you're a little bit more numbed out. So it makes sense. All right, common substances and detection. Today we're going to be talking about stimulants, depressants, inhalants, hallucinogens, and cannabinoids. Meth, usually administered in a bubble, but it also can be injected. Coffee is a stimulant. Cigarettes, stimulant. Cocaine, stimulant. These are they're supposed to be magic mushrooms. They don't really look like that in actual life, but
I was going to buy some dried mushrooms last night, and I decided I would never use dried mushrooms from the grocery store because it was $5. Otherwise, there is a good demo at the grocery store if you look at one type.
Oh, all right.
There's no others.
Just handing out shrooms?
No, it was the appropriate eating shrooms, but they're dried, and so they look like shrooms.
Not even if you smell them.
It's kind of.
Why does he know that?
It's kind of crazy at like Cub. Somebody gives you mushrooms, and then you're in aisle 5, and the box of Lucky Charms is like trying to grab at you. Oh, I'm sick. All right, stimulants include coffee, cocaine, nicotine, methamphetamine and amphetamines. This is kind of what a typical, how many grams would you say this is?
It's more than an ounce.
Yeah, okay. A little bit more of an ounce of methamphetamine. It's really not, but this is what it looks like. Basically, it just looks up like cut up pieces of glass. And how they bake this stuff, they bake them on cookie sheets. There's a whole big process that goes into it, but at the end, it ends up on a cookie sheet and they just crack it off, so it takes this type of form.
It comes in all colors.
You watch Breaking Bad too, huh?
Yeah, and if you need more on that, just watch some episodes of Breaking Bad. Here's a little cocaine, little bumps for you. This is, if you remember back to that chart, this is going to put you up at around a 500 dopamine mark. So what does this stuff actually do to you? One thing that I can say in my own experience, the 2.5 years I've worked at LDR, and in those same years, working in the Men's Relational Health Program and the COD program, this is a big, big challenge for our society right now. This meth crap. The meth high. All psychoactive drugs will give you some sense of euphoria. The meth high is stimulating dopamines up near 13,000, or if it's a continuous user, those spikes go down to around 800, 900, still pretty high. These people get paranoid, they get hyper-focused, they can get aggressive. They're just, you never know what you're going to get. It's kind of all over the place. They can get conspiratorial. But physical effects, heart changes, their body is fully stimulated. Everything. Imagine all of your nerve endings active. You can, like your sensories, all of your sensories are just up.
So it's like they have to do something. I had a client once that had a box of toothpicks, like 1,000 count something or other, and he hid them and then rediscovered them every single day. Like he had to do something, and that was it. How do I rediscover my toothpicks all over the house?
We also had a client once too that he was high on meth and he hit his Vyvanse when he got sober. He hit his Vyvanse when he was high and then he couldn't find it when he got sober, and that was kind of the. And Vyvanse is an amphetamine.
They are fixing carts at Walmart at 3 in the morning.
What's that?
They are fixing shopping carts at Walmart at 3 in the morning.
Yeah. Well, and it used to be when I was an officer, we'd walk into these, go into a loud party complaint or domestic or whatever, and you'd walk up and there'd be a dude in the garage with the TV all over the place, and like he's working on the engine. It's like, oh man, yeah, I'm going to be judgmental here. And like, okay, my guess is he's using meth. They'll take the stuff apart, but they're delusional in the fact that they think that they're engineers and they never put it back together. So.
Well, and also if you talk about like the progression of meth, right? Like at first it could look like really productive, like my house is really clean and it's really organized and I don't have to sleep and I'm cooking all these meals and my kids are getting everywhere they need to go, and then all of a sudden I'm up for 5 days and now I'm hallucinating and I think that somebody's in my TV and I'm taking the windows out and.
Yeah, your first hit of meth, you got a 12-hour high, and it lasts. And then it's like after that 12 hours is up, or before that, when they start feeling like they're coming down, they smoke more. Then they're up for 3, 5, 6 days. Excuse me. Withdrawal timeline. There's cravings. There's possibility of psychosis, extreme fatigue, depression, and anxiety. Anxiety is something that sticks with them for a long time. So when we're saying that it takes us a while for the body to get back to its baseline, that homeostasis, meth is one of those things. Meth is one of those drugs, unfortunately. The skin. So what does this stuff do to the skin? Acne worsens. Skin picking often occurs because they feel like there's little bugs underneath their skin. And so they'll sit there and get preoccupied with it, and they just mark up their entire face. The other piece of this is the muscular tissue and the fat. They're not, somebody under the influence of meth, they're not thinking, everything goes out the door. They're not thinking about showering. They're not thinking about bills. They're not even thinking about food. They're not even thinking about drinking water at that point, or at some point. And so malnutrition is going to break down your muscle fibers. Malnutrition is also going to hurt your teeth. The teeth, the meth mouth or whatever, isn't caused by, the smoke going in and, creating all havoc. No. It's because they're so dehydrated that the saliva doesn't have enough to replenish and becomes bacteria and starts eating away at the teeth. So it's a very, very sad thing. So I just had a guy the other day did an intake and did his assessment, and it's like, okay, first thing you're doing, you're going to the doctor, and then you are certainly going to the dentist. He hadn't been to the dentist in 10 years. And he only has like 6 teeth, 6.5 teeth. So, alcohol use. Signs and symptoms. Somebody coming into your office. Have any of you guys experienced that? Somebody comes in pretty drunk, or at least you smell. How do they carry themselves? How did that session go? I'm just curious. Because I can tell you in my own experience, they can go either way. A person can come in and can give a full assessment, be totally engaged on the buck, and also they could be under the influence of alcohol as well. But I've also had guys come in where they're stumbling around and they can barely sit and they're slurring the words and stuff like that. Well, at that point, assessment's over. Let's get you to the hospital or get you a ride here or home or whatever the case may be. One of the things to look at is, or one of the things to keep in mind with somebody who's under the influence of alcohol is the smell of consumed alcoholic beverage coming from them. You're not going to smell alcohol in their breath. Alcohol has no smell. You're going to smell what's associated with it. Also, bloodshot, watery eyes. Are they able to track? If they're doot, 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 that's called nystagmus. That's what cops test on the road. They're not able to track with alcohol. Say like marijuana, it's completely different. They're able to track. Cocaine, they're definitely able to track. Unsteady walking, droopy eyes, slowed heart rate, slowed speech, blackouts. Alcohol and benzodiazepines are the 2 drugs that you can die of if you go into withdrawal and are not getting medical care. Alcohol is water soluble, so it gets into your system and it's out between 1 to 3 days, essentially. Benzodiazepines, that's a slide coming up, can stay in your system depending on how much you use, 30 to 60 days. So I could stop if I'm prescribed benzos or if I'm doing Xanax and I stop today, it's 17th, February 17th, I'm still at risk of having a seizure. That's the crazy piece of this. But alcohol, we're on alcohol now. So withdrawal timeline, anxiety, insomnia, nausea, and abdominal pain for that first stage, that first 8 hours. Blood pressure spikes and body temp spikes. And then probably about that week period is where you're at risk for more hallucinations, DTs, delirium tremens. Have you guys ever heard of that? Seizures and agitations. And this could potentially go up for weeks depending upon how big of a user you are. Opiates. Opiates are derived from the poppy seed. There's different locations in South America, South Africa, and in Central America. Most notably, Afghanistan. Afghanistan has a lot of poppy seeds. Those poppy seeds are essentially broken down into morphine. And morphine's good. Morphine helps us at the hospitals, it helps us in warfare, and all that different stuff. But everything else that comes from that is all synthetic. Hydrocodone, heroin, codeine, that type of thing. So what are we looking at with a person under opiates? One giveaway for me is really, I can tell if they're kind of more relaxed, almost like they'd just woken up. And if you look at the base, this part of like their eyelid droops a little bit. And they have a 1 to 2 second delay, I've noticed as well. Pupils are going to be pinpricks. Usually whenever there's a depressant involved, your vision will somewhat, or the amount of light that you're allowed to come in will constrict. It's just not the case with alcohol. So signs and symptoms: itching and scratching, nodding out, deepening of voice, change in sleep patterns, vomiting, intense sugar cravings. Somebody comes into your office who just shot up in the parking lot is going to look like this. That's classic, just recent use. And that is also very, very dangerous. Please, if you find out that somebody just shot up in or before your session, call 911. Because we just don't, or call somebody, and we just don't, because we just don't know if this person's about to go into, if this person's going to overdose. And if that's the case, we got Narcan here. Jeff, did you want to say something?
So if I'm not necessarily familiar or not totally sure, and I ask them or confront them about nodding off, what will they normally say?
I'm just tired.
I've been getting a lot of sleep.
Huh?
You know,
Oh, thanks.
for a reason, logical or reasonable reason.
Yep, usually the reasons are, so in a case like that, okay, I see you're doing this. What's up? I'm just really tired. Okay, how much sleep did you get last night? 8 hours? Okay. What's causing you to tired? Oh, I didn't eat anything. And then it's just that the progression is going, it more goes towards, they end up almost like kind of falling asleep in there.
And none of us are that boring. It's pretty
And here's the other,
normal tired.
and here's the other piece. Opiates with a benzo use is going to increase that tenfold. They are really going to be showing the symptoms. Yeah.
I think too, we've had a couple guys under the influence of opiates who like they're trying to keep themselves awake, right? So they're like eating like as much as they can. They keep drinking. They keep getting up. They're pacing. They're going to the bathroom because they're trying to like stay awake so they don't nod out. So sometimes I think that like, if you can tell they're trying to keep themselves awake, it can be kind of a giveaway.
All right. So heroin high, opiate high. People use opiates essentially for pain relief. But if you abuse the opiates, obviously you're going to get a sense of euphoria. There's some disorientation that exists. People who use heroin and other opiates, they get constipated a lot. And you'll see some people, it's kind of like they have like, not bugs underneath their skin like those with meth users, but they get like they're itchy. It's like they have a rash or whatnot. Extreme use, heart problems, insomnia, death, and addiction. And this is kind of the timeline we have for opiate withdrawal. One of the things with opiate withdrawal I've seen in these detox centers, these people literally feel like they're on death's door. Like take the worst flu you possibly could think of. Aches, pains, sweating, being hot and cold, and just the mental confusion. It's like they're living in hell. And the thing is though, they go to a detox center, they can't give them anything really to make them feel comfortable. They gotta wait it out. They medically monitor them, but they essentially gotta wait it out. So, I'll talk a little bit more about the opioid epidemic that we've had and really how it started. Actually, I'll do a little 2-minute piece on, or am I chasing that?
Chasing a dragon.
Okay. No, not the dragon, the nut. Remember the nut?
I know, but I'd say it might be more of a dragon if you're thinking too much.
Okay. All right. So, opioid epidemic in this country. Give me 2 minutes. One of the things that caused this is people were getting into accidents, or elderly people were having hip replacements or knee replacements, and those doctors are giving them a script of about 60 or 80 opiates, whatever the case may be. Well, over time, they kept using it as prescribed, and then now their knee feels great, and they feel like they can go run their 18-mile marathon, or not, and all of a sudden, all this shit starts happening to them. They don't feel normal. They start getting sick. They start thinking a little differently. That's opiate withdrawal, and this happened to a lot of people, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And from that, they were going to cheaper alternatives. So you can go on the street and get heroin less than having to make the appointment to go into the doctor to get another prescription. And on the chance, the pharmacist is not going to recognize that you just filled that same prescription 10 days ago to get the opioids. So that was very systemic with that. The other piece of the opioid addiction is, where is it coming from? It's coming from the cartels. One of the reasons why opiates are so cheap is because the cartels got smart and they started cutting it with fentanyl. So you have less product, which gets you more high, and you can distribute it out. Another piece of that, and something that the federal government is aware of it, and we haven't seen a lot in the news, is cart fentanyl. Does anyone know what cart fentanyl is, other than the LEDCs? Cart fentanyl is an opioid, is a synthetic opiate that's used to tranquilize elephants. Now that stuff's coming over from Asia. Just even a speck of that stuff, if I got it on my hand, could put me into overdose. That's how potent that stuff is. God help us if that becomes an epidemic. If that's because people are going to be dying all over the place. There was a story of 2 first responders in Ohio. This is back in 2014, and the medics got done, degloved, and touched on the side where the patient was in the rig, on the side on one of the ledges, and there was a little bit of cart fentanyl, and boom, both medics dropped. And they had to give them, like, not just a vial of Narcan, like vials upon vials of Narcan, just to get their system back into play. So this is really, really dangerous stuff.
The other thing that happens too is you get these people, guys or gals, that are incarcerated, and when they come out of incarceration, they think they can do the same amount of heroin they did before, and now they're flopping out. And so a lot of times it's helpful for them to get on some type of Suboxone or something actually coming out of prison, which seems counterintuitive, but it's actually helpful for them to avoid.
And to his point, Prince. We all know who Prince is. Prince, 2 weeks before he died, was in the air, and they had to do an emergency landing in Chicago, and they administered Narcan to him. They got him back up. Narcan is an opioid blocker, so you can't get high. And what it does when it gets into your system, it puts you right away into withdrawal, because the drugs no longer are having its effects. 2 weeks after that, he went back to the same amount of dose of fentanyl he was on, and they found him dead in that elevator. It's tragedy. It's terrible. But that's the thing. He went back. Narcan blew all that crap out of his system, and he went back to the stuff that he knew, which caused his death. All right. So other most commonly abused opiates. Marijuana. Good old Mary Jane. All right, signs and symptoms of marijuana. Has anyone ever seen, or show of hands, people have seen people under the influence of marijuana?
Everybody else,
Everybody else been on there? I don't know. Okay. So,
Use marijuana, show hands.
so marijuana, you're going to look at a change in behavior, change in hunger and eating. That's a big one. The munchies, that's associated with that. Droopy eyes. Somebody under the influence of marijuana, maybe their eyes are going to sink back a little bit back into their head because the back of their head feels a little heavier. That's part of that euphoria that they feel. Also with that comes a slow heart rate, slowed speech, goofiness. Trying to think of the other piece to that marijuana. Cottonmouth. Motivation. Or short-term memory. Out the door. Long periods of use of marijuana has shown that your short-term memory just becomes crap. You're too chill all the time. And then with the eyes, bloodshot eyes, pupils can dilate depending upon certain strains of marijuana that you use. But somebody that comes in with marijuana, the most noticeable thing is going to be the smell. Does it smell like cigarettes and skunks? If that's present, then rest assured you got
We had a client come in,
smoky in there.
What marijuana smelled like, and somebody must have been smoking. One of our clients must have smoked in the parking lot, so they smelled really strong. And he comes in, he's like, "What's that sweet grassy smell?"
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh no."
Grassy.
No.
All right, symptoms of marijuana withdrawal. Oh, and I just want to put this out there too. If you guys ever heard people saying, "Oh, you can't get addicted to marijuana"? Yeah, they're dead wrong. You can.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I tell them that and he doesn't believe me.
We should talk about that in the panel, right? That
Yeah.
panel discussion.
All right, so symptoms of marijuana withdrawal. We got abdominal pain, anger, aggression, anorexia, anxiety, chills, craving, depression, phoresis, fever, headaches, insomnia, irritability, restlessness, tremors. Biggest thing that I see, tumors, yeah. Biggest thing that I see, tons of anxiety, tons of craving, irritability with regards to the last time they used and when they are where they're at right now. Insomnia. I've had a lot of guys say, I only use just at nighttime, just to help me get to sleep. Okay. And restlessness. Guys, remember Half Baked? No? If a gentleman walks into your office kind of looking like that, send us a text if you're curious about it anymore. Yeah, take a picture and send it. So, with all the marijuana stuff going on in this country of ours, people have really been able to get creative. So you can smoke this shit, you can vaporize, you can use it in vapes, you can eat it, you can drink it, you can run little topical stuff on there and wish, your farms are going to get bigger, whatever the case may be. But essentially, there's a lot of different ways that this stuff is getting ingested. And this brownies for lunch. And I'll say this, because we're on the precipice of marijuana being fully legalized in this country. All this stuff is going to be, it's the same thing what happened in the 1900s with tobacco. It's going to be advertised, it's going to be marketed towards the kids, it's going to be it's going to look fun and glamorous and not that big of a deal. So, that's what we have to look forward to, I guess.
I just want to mention one thing with the edibles being more popular. Technically you can't overdose and die from marijuana, but you can overdose in a sense where if you're eating it, with edibles, and that's happened a lot in Colorado, where people, like, they'll be instructed, like, you only eat, like, half a cookie, and then they don't feel it right away because it takes longer when you ingest it, and they're like, oh, I don't really feel it, so I'm gonna, like, eat more. And then people go into, like, psychosis, and there's been, like, cases where people are, like, killing themselves and, like, other people. And so
it's impossible. Marijuana is safe.
Well, in my experience, around the year 2010 is when when I was in law enforcement, first got exposed to synthetic marijuana, K2, spice. Wow, all over the place. They were selling it at every single smoke shop. And the amount of psych holds that we did those next couple of months were just astronomical. You get these kids, 3 in the morning, butt naked, running around County Road 42, just complete delusional about what's going on.
Yeah,
so
marijuana or cannabis in general, right, isn't what it used to be. It's not just plant-based marijuana. People are dabbing. We got oils. They're quadruple what they were.
More
in
potent.
levels of THC. So we're getting that like super high psychosis type stuff from it instead of just like chill.
Yep.
Could you describe cannabinoid hyperemesis?
So cannabinoid hyperemesis is essentially your body's overdose on THC. So if there's enough THC or there's a significant amount of THC in your system, and which is disrupting different things. So in the brain, within the brain pathways, the brain pathway to eating, to sleeping, kind of more like the reptilian brain, that's affected greatly when it comes to that. People that have cannabinoid, it's such a tongue twister. Cannabinoid hyperesis will kind of get sick and just start throwing up.
Yeah, it's like excessive vomiting.
It's excessive vomiting.
I've had a client or two with this, and for some reason there's like this association with, like they take a lot of hot showers because it relieves the nausea and the vomiting, and so there's been like some research and like the connection of just taking a lot of hot showers because that's like the one relief that they get.
And I looked more into that, the relief, if somebody ever goes into cannabinoid hyperesis again, eat mangoes. Mangoes, I can't remember what the chemical is, but it does bind to the cannabinoid receptor in the brain, and it'll help kind of regulate that. I just read that.
And I think there is kind of like a correlation with like when they started seeing more of this and when like the THC concentrate dabs like kind of came on the scene kind of at the same time, so it's like more concentrated.
And with adolescents, you might see more of that, like dabbing, or like oils, dropping oils in their drinks.
Yep.
But asking that question of what calms you down when you're in that rapid vomiting, and if it comes back to the hot showers, that's the telltale sign. And they don't understand. I mean, it just that's what we're seeing more and more. It's just, and how it was described to us is it's at that point your body can no longer break down THC, and there's no going back.
Yes, yes.
And they don't want to believe that. They're like, I just need to be done with the vaping and go back to regular.
It's essentially what happens is, and you're not taking it in a pill form, but antabuse, disulfiram, it stops the breakdown it stops the breakdown from alcohol to ethyl glycol in your system, which causes you to get very, very sick and vomiting and stuff like that. But that happens with what you're explaining happens with too much of it. It's the same type of thing. The body just can't break it down anymore. So, go ahead.
I just wanted to offer one more thing about the trajectory of legalizing. I've got a friend that works in law enforcement up in Winnipeg, and Canada has already gone through the legalizing process of marijuana. And the rate of like meth abuse and meth dangers in law enforcement have just gone bonkers, because much of like the mindset around the using culture is what is out of bounds. How can I okay, if marijuana becomes a conventional legitimate thing to purchase, then it's no longer as desirable as what is out of bounds. So, so meth use after people that or communities that have gone through the legalizing process is just
skyrocketed.
Through it. So it's so scary to think about kind of the trajectory.
Well, and with that, if you follow the logic, like I had a slides before, you're chasing that dragon. You want more and more and more and more. And so regardless if this stuff is legal or not, you're going to want the best, the more higher potent stuff.
If it's off limits, then it makes me want it more.
Yes, and the fact, I'll get into that a little bit, how...
If you legalize it, the government's going to control the levels. So you can go to a store and you can buy up to a certain level. The black market will always look to supply higher highs, different levels. So you may not be, you're still not going to the legal source to get your marijuana. Now you're going to an illegal source to get a better high.
Okay.
And the dope dealer's got to make money off something different. So they're gonna. That's another reason why the other drugs get more popular.
All right, benzodiazepines. What are these prescribed for? Anxiety, acute anxiety. When you abuse them, there is a change of behavior, drowsiness, droopy eyes, slowed heart rate, speech. Basically, somebody who is under the influence of benzos look like they're drunk. Very, very acutely as their short-term memory goes right out the door. They may not be able to tell you what they did 5 minutes ago. And if that's the case, they're kind of in that blackout that blackout area. But they feel all cool and chill, and it's almost like a drunk type of behavior that they'll exhibit. Benzos are also very, very dangerous to just withdraw from just like that. To withdraw from benzos, either in a detox center where they're reducing you down each week, or whatever the case, because somebody, like I said, a month later after they stopped use could have a seizure, depending upon how much of the drug they were taking. And these are just some Xanax, Klonopin, Ativan. So the fact of the matter is, when this thing is changed in terms of addiction, it's not going to go back. I'm never going to be able to drink normally again, so please don't ever offer me a beer. I just know that. And part of my recovery was me getting to that peace and that peace of mind of acknowledging I can't drink again. And I'm totally fine with it. Totally fine with it. But my brain is altered. When I first started working here, one of the guys in my home group, 26 years of sobriety, goes on a cruise to Italy with his wife, thinks he could have a glass of wine, starts out with a glass of wine, wasn't a big deal. He had 20-some years, not that big of a deal. By March, they were divorced, and by June, he had committed suicide. And he was under the influence when he took his life. That's how fast this stuff can happen. And if you're ever at an AA meeting and you get the old timers say, I'm 50 years sober and still an alcoholic, that's what they're recognizing, that they can't go back. And if they do go back, and it does happen, just start right over.
The toughest clients I've ever had with alcohol are the ones that had some sobriety, like significant, maybe 5 years or more, and then go back. And now they're in my office again because they're on that bender. And those are really tough cases.
Yep. And my last year in law enforcement was in 2013. 3 overdose deaths. All were males, all were white males between the ages of 22 and 28. All 3 of them had 6 months, 5-6 months sobriety. Something happened, went back, and we found with 175. In toxicology, 6.0 blood alcohol level. Thing is, though, is people will get sober from this stuff. And then, you know, some vulnerabilities kick in and some stressors kick in, and then they feel like they can go back to the same type or the same kind that they can use. And it's just like, it's lights out, man. It sucks.
It was like once this belief, and there's been substantial research since then, but that your brain healed from addiction, right? Like it got better and you could go back to using, or if alcohol wasn't your drug of choice, you could use alcohol. But now there's enough research that's been done in the brain to show that once you're an addict, you're always an addict. That doesn't change. And so getting people to accept that, right, and understand it, and then that way they can make those choices appropriately, because so many people try to negotiate with their addiction. And, you know, I don't have a problem with drinking, so I'm going to drink tonight.
All right, any questions thus far? I'd like to take the break at 10 o'clock if we could. Is that all right? Because any questions?
Use the mic.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. I'm gonna, yeah, sure.
I'm curious because oftentimes I hear lots of people that talk about how like ADD and ADHD medications like a low dose version of meth. And so then I've had clients that started to abuse that, and so I'm curious about your guys' perspective on those prescriptions.
How old would you say the ranges are?
So I had a few parents I remember I worked with in child protection. One mom was young, I think she was about 25, and then another mom that was older in her mid-40s.
Okay. That question will be answered the next section. Because I'm going to get more into, the next section is really going to be looking at the three components: genetics, early use, and trauma as kind of like these pre-exposure pieces. So I think that if we can wait, we'll cover that.
I can't wait, Nick.
I know you can't, Jamie. All right. Before we break, any other questions? That was a good question. Any other questions? Okay. Before we break, I just want to talk about a little bit about this vaping epidemic. Why is this an epidemic? Anyone know why? We're calling this an epidemic preemptively, because 50 years ago we were in the exact same spot with cigarettes. We had no idea what was gonna happen with the cigarettes. Interesting thing about cigarettes, didn't start getting packaged in those little packages with the cellophane and the sticks till 1900, until the drug companies came in and took over. Beforehand, you're just, you know, it was a cash crop. As a cash crop, the Native Americans helped the white men sell in early colonial America, and it was used throughout 1700s, 1800s. There wasn't a lot of problems there. Then you get the corporation comes in, and all of a sudden putting Miracle-Gro on those plants to make them a little thicker, make the veins a little thicker, you're going to be able to get more nicotine out of those. So in the 1900s, they synthesized all of it down. And then from 1900 to 1940, they marketed it. So any magazine, any white, what do they call the white and black picture films that they used to have, all had people smoking it. They're all marketing it. We're at that same spot right now. And one interesting fact is this too. Between 1995 and 2010, there has been a dramatic decrease in the use of cigarettes amongst young people. Holy crap, that is awesome. More than any other time before that. So we know that the education piece is getting out to the young people, and they're listening to it. You ask a kid, do you want to have a cigarette? Ugh, nasty. I don't want to get cancer. It's the same damn thing, essentially. But it's blueberry. So what is vaping? It's battery-powered devices that heat up e-liquid or nicotine salts in aerosol form that's inhaled into the lungs. It's just a different administration into the lungs. The thing is, though, is that a regular cigarette, you may know what you're going to get in terms of nicotine level, probably 1.2 to 1.5 units. This, you have no idea. You have no idea how much nicotine are in some of these vapes.
Or you do, and it's a ton.
Or you do, and it's an astronomical ton. This came out just recently. 76% of youths do not believe e-cigs are hazardous. State of Minnesota research that was done 2018-2019. This is the stat that came out. Use has increased from 50% to 100% over the last 2 years. Earlier, I gave a talk at Egan High School, and before that, I talked with every school or school resource officer in Dakota County. And that's the number one thing they all said. Yep, it's the vape thing. Yep, it's the vape thing. All right, what are you doing with it? Are you giving tickets? Are you arresting? No, it's a 3-strike system. There's so much of it that they're doing a 3-strike system with it. You get caught with, if I got caught with a pack of cigarettes in high school, that's a 2-week suspension for my sporting team and probably a 5-day suspension. There's so much of it at the schools right now, they're just overwhelmed. They can't kick everybody out of their school. And the other thing is, you'll see in these next upcoming slides, this stuff, I mean, it's marketing to the young people. This kid, I mean, look at the difference. That's his vaping pen. That's how disguised it is. And being that the age has just increased to 21 years old, I could probably predict he's not 21 years old either. USB cartridges, lipstick. The smallest little things can be turned into that. And again, why are these products coming online? To market to the kids. They're cool.
And it's not just
I heard my daughter and my son talking about his friend at school talking about her vape and blinging it up with like pinks, like rhinestones and stuff like that. It's like, dear Lord.
It's not just nicotine that they're putting in their vapes, right? It's other stuff too. They don't know what it's going to do to them. They want to try it.
Right.
I have a question.
Sure.
I hear some kids. Oh, sorry. I hear some people talking about like, oh, but it's just zero nic, like it's not going to be harmful. I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and part of that research I should have added was the educational piece, how effective it is telling these kids it's just like cigarettes but without the stinky smell. It's just like cigarettes without the stinky smell. Because you have to understand, let's go back to this slide. So this is the nicotine juice, this is the stem. This is heated up by an ion battery. There's a chemical exchange that happens between the stem that's heating up and the actual liquid. And that molecular exchange is producing molecules very similar to formaldehyde and lead and a bunch of other different stuff as well. And they're smoking it. And these kids will smoke it all the way down to there. Well, if anything, if you've got nothing left to smoke, what are you smoking? You're smoking just the rod pipe. So all that excess stuff you're getting into your lungs.
Heavy metal.
Heavy metal, yeah. So, effects on health.
I thought you had a question or comment.
Effects on health, vasoconstriction of the heart and blood vessels. Vaping hurts the lungs by shutting down the natural defense systems by making someone more vulnerable to illnesses such as bronchitis and pneumonia. They contain the same type of cancer-causing carcinogens. And like I said, the metals found in vapes affect the heart, liver, and lungs. All right, so why don't we take a 10-minute break? Or any questions or concerns?
Everybody look around
Rachel?
the room. Remember, we're trying to figure out what's wrong with our college kid.